In this lesson, we'll learn how to begin using the physical sun and sky nodes inside of MentalRay. All right, great. So go ahead and open up this Lesson 6 Begin file. I've got several pieces of geometry with materials already set up for them here inside of our scene, and I want to begin to render this out. Now, this is an outdoor scene, obviously. We've got kind of the walls of what used to be a building and just kind of some Wild West themed assets kind of littered about here. Now, if I were to come over here and just simply render this scene out, what you'll find is pretty much completely normal. We'll go ahead and just render this frame and take a look. And once that wraps up, we'll see here that really the render doesn't look very good at all. Well, there's something very, very important missing inside of our scene, and that's the presence of any type of light that's been created. So by default, Maya uses the default scene lighting to go ahead and illuminate the scene when we render it out. Now, if we were to close this out, and let's just open up the render settings for MentalRay here. And inside here, I'm going to come over here to our indirect lighting, and up here under environment, I want to point your attention to this physical sun and sky button right here. Now, this actually is really great for outdoor shots like this one. Might not be so good for an indoor shot, but what this does is several things. So let's go ahead and create that physical sun and sky. So as soon as I did that, you'll notice here that obviously we have this little icon that has changed right here, meaning that we do have essentially a shape, something plugged into this physical sun and sky. Actually, there's several different nodes that have been created. Now, we also have some indirect illumination options in Final Gather that's been enabled. We have an environment that's been created as well as a light. So let's go ahead and begin to look at this here. Let me just go ahead and close my attribute editor for right now. And let's go ahead and, before we do anything else, let's just save this for comparison and take a quick render and take a look at what our scene now looks like. Once that render finishes, what you'll see is a pretty dramatic change in what the default lighting did versus this physical sun and sky. So already with the click of one button, we've made some significant progress as far as lighting this scene. Now, I do want to point out to you that many of the textures seem rather washed out, and this is entirely normal. Now, this brings to light another issue that we're actually going to learn about over the course of the next couple of lessons. But you can see here that as of right now, we do have some extremely bright illumination that is believably a result of actually a physical sun overhead. We also have an environment that has been created. You can see that sort of here in the distance. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But let's go ahead for right now. I'm going to close out of the render view, and let me just go ahead and let's hit the 4 key on our keyboard and see if we can't find the light that was created. Now, in case you're looking for it, the Maya grid is right here, and I might not be able to click on that light without zooming into it a little bit here. You can see that I got the ground plane. There's our light. Just hit that open bracket key a few times to go back. There we go. Let me go ahead and grab my scale tool. Let's just scale this guy up so we can begin to work with this light. So as I've scaled that up, you can see that what we're looking at here is indeed a directional light. Let me just go back to my shaded view here. So with this directional light, this light represents the sun overhead and the direction that that sun is being cast into our scene here. So if we come back and take a look at our render here, you can see here that sun was angled just kind of at this direction right here. And you can see if you look at the shadow being cast by this chair that it matches up with the current direction of the sun. Now, this sun direction can be changed. This is just a directional light here inside of Maya. So I'll turn my textures back on here for just a moment, and let's go ahead and grab the rotate tool. And I'm going to take this directional light, I'm going to begin to move this. So let me go ahead and just move that and shift it in this direction here, kind of so that sun is angled into our scene a little bit more. If we were to go ahead and do that, let's save this for comparison and re-render, What you'll notice here is that the lighting inside of our scene absolutely responds to the change in sun direction. You can see this shadow under this chair has now shifted and reacted. Now, not only that, but the color that's being used in, for example, the sky, that also reacts to changes in the sun position. So obviously right now we've got that sun overhead, so it's kind of a midday type lighting. What if we wanted to simulate maybe a dusk or a daybreak type of lighting? If obviously you've paid attention to that in the real world, then you know kind of what that looks like as far as the colors. Now let me just go ahead and change my directional light here, and I'm going to drag that to where it's almost down running with the ground plane here. So if I was to do that, let's go ahead and save for comparison and re-render again. What we'll notice here, not only is there a dramatic change in the amount of illumination that's being cast into our scene, but there's also a pretty dramatic change in the color. You can now see more oranges and yellows here as they are bouncing off the geometry in our scene. So you can see how this sun and this actual directional light here and the position that we put this in can change the look of our render in terms of both the illumination as well as the color. And ultimately, it's really based on real-world values. If the sun is just off of the horizon line, then it's obviously daybreak or dusk, and the sun is either rising up in the distance or it's setting in the distance. So, and how that changes our scene. Now, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and, with my lights selected here, let's go ahead and access the attribute editor so we can begin to look at some of these nodes that are connected here. So if we come over here, you can see I'm currently working with the sun shape, but if we come over, you can see that we have this MIA Physical Sky 1 connected to it. So this is going to actually control the sky. So if we come back over here and begin to look, you can kind of see it over the wall on either side. We actually do have a sky environment as well as a horizon line here that is being rendered out in our scene. As a matter of fact, if I go ahead and let's just make sure we have our light a little bit higher, and I begin to kind of orbit around, just kind of move to where we can actually see a little bit more of that sky here. We'll go ahead and take another render. There we go. You can really see now at this point exactly what that sky and that horizon look like here inside of our scene. So we actually have a tremendous degree of control over exactly what's going on here in this environment. Although it looks pretty simple right now, we can begin to introduce some really interesting effects here. So with our MIA Physical Sky selected, let's go ahead and scroll down here. And you can see here that we have things like haze, red-blue shift, saturation. These are all going to change how that sky looks when it's rendered out. So the haze right now is currently set at 0, which, you know, I honestly, even out in the country, I can't say that I've ever encountered a situation where there wasn't some form of visible particulates in the atmosphere that were creating the look of haze. So sometimes in the cities where there's a lot of pollution, you're going to get more of this haze that kind of sits right around in this area right here. So we can actually begin to introduce some of that haze into our renders if we really want to. So you can see here there's a value. Let's go ahead and just bump this up to maybe something like 0.5. And we will go ahead and save this render for comparison and re-render. And once that render finishes, you can really see here, if we scrub back and forth, what that subtle increase in haze is actually doing to the sky. It's almost like the sky and the ground are being blurred together a little bit in terms of the color. So you can see what that haze starts to do to our renders. Now, let's go ahead and jump back over here, and for example, let's go ahead and set this back to 0, just so we can kind of move on to red and blue shift. So red and blue shift is, well, it's really going to affect the wavelength of color that gets passed through the atmosphere and then returned to our camera. But really what this is it's going to be something you want to probably use pretty sparingly. Ultimately, this is something that if you use it heavily, it's going to really make your renders look quite awkward. And really, honestly, the only time I ever use this is if I really want to add just a little bit of kind of a certain type of style to a render, maybe. So what this will do, if we were to come over here in this red blue shift attribute and begin to increase this value into the positives, so let's say maybe something like a 0.2, something like that. What that will do is that's going to start to bring more warm colors into our scene. So if we were to go ahead and save this for comparison and re-render this with that set to 0.2, what you can see here is that we've really started to introduce those warmer tones into this image. Now, I would pretty much try and stick with about a 0.1, maybe a 0.2, because once you get beyond that, it really starts to look rather unrealistic. So let me just save that for comparison here. And to kind of contrast that, if we were to come over and switch this maybe in the negative direction, maybe we applied a negative 0.2. That's going to basically apply the exact opposite change here. So essentially that negative value is going to add cooler colors into our rendered image. And once this wraps up, you can see it has definitely done just that. So you can see here, there's our warm image, there's our base image, and there's our cooler image here. So now the next value is saturation, and essentially what this is just going to control the saturation of our sky. So you can see right now we're set at a value of 1. Now the one thing that I definitely want to show you about here is this horizon height. And to illustrate this, let me just jump over here to my view menu from my viewport, and I'm going to come down to this camera bookmark for my render view, which is going to set me back to exactly where we started. Fantastic. So now the horizon height, if I were to just come in here and render this out again. All right, great. So the horizon height here, as you can see, runs kind of right through this portion of the image right here. Now this horizon's pretty high, and maybe this is something that I wanted to start to kind of lower down in the scene. Now, obviously, we've also kind of got this weird tangent that's starting to form here where the top of this tree is just barely penetrating the horizon line, and that's creating kind of a visual distraction for me. So what we could begin to do here is we could come over and adjust this horizon height attribute. So if we wanted to lower that horizon height down, let's go ahead and in this horizon height, let's put in a negative value here, just so we can begin to lower that down some. We'll go ahead and start off with something rather small, maybe a minus 0.5. All right, great. So we'll go ahead and bring up our render view here and re-render that current frame. And once that render completes, you can see here that we've actually dropped that horizon height down just about right if we just wanted to get it off the top of that tree here. So you can see this was our horizon. Oh, I did not save that image. That's okay. The horizon before was just right about right here. So now obviously if we wanted to completely eliminate the horizon from this image altogether, we would need to drop this down quite a bit more than just a 0.5. So maybe we put in here minus 5 instead of 0.5. And come in and save this for comparison and re-render. And what you'll see here once the render finishes up is that the horizon line in this render is completely gone. So we have a lot of control over this physical sky that was created here within this MIA physical sky node. Now, again, I would encourage you to experiment some with this a little bit. There's a lot of different attributes related to that sky here that you can begin to look at. So now we did mention a moment ago that there is a pretty definite problem here inside this image. We have here a lot of really washed out textures, and what that is doing is it's actually unearthing kind of a much deeper problem that as soon as you really begin to do some serious rendering inside of Mental Ray, that you're going to immediately need to know how to deal with and really how to work around this. So we'll go ahead and begin to learn a little bit about the importance of color space beginning in the next lesson.